This is a Legend Vox exotic mission while capped under the power level, and I can melt tanks, melt bosses, and pretty much just melt anything that gets in my way. Now hand cannons recently got buffed inside of PvE, and although some of them like Sunshot were already really good, well, they just got better. With this new Hunter build, we're going to be able to dominate in endgame PvE using our hand cannons to literally just melt bosses down to the ground almost instantly. And if on the likely chance that this is generally an unintentional bug that will be patched or nerfed, well, don't worry, because this build isn't just dedicated to using those hand cannons like Malfeasance. This build will work with all hand cannons to make them more lethal than they already are, with some of the current PvE damage buffs. We're going to use Malfeasance with Lucky Pants, a Sunshot, and some weapons that are not hand cannons that work really well with the build. And the best part about this build is that even without the Malfeasance bug, it still wrecks everything, because we're going to get Infinite Restoration, Infinite Radiant, a stackable DPS buff for both our abilities and our weapons, and a bunch of other benefits. Our main goal, other than Malfeasance, is to chain between our Solar Melee and Sunshot, so we're causing crazy ignitions that just obliterates everything while getting all those buffs at the same time. Now if you guys like this one, then a rating is much appreciated, and be sure to check out my new Season 22 build playlist down below so that you can stay up to date with some of the latest builds out. Otherwise guys, let's talk some more. So hand cannons, they got a 20% damage buff in PvE against minor adds, and a 75% damage buff against mages, which on its own is good enough as it is in endgame content. But by taking advantage of this season's artifact perks, the monochromatic, that increases ability damage when using a solar weapon, and increases solar weapon damage when using abilities. So we're going to be able to buff that damage by a further 10% because of this. Not to mention the stackable DPS buffs we have with solar weapon surge mods, as well as a 25% damage buff from Radiant, totaling to a total of a plus 193% damage increase inside of PvE to hand cannons, making them one of the best weapon types to use right now inside of endgame content like Master and Grandmaster activities. Add a debuff of 30% to the list from things like a tether or tractor by another player, and the 10 times damage from Malfeasance despite it not being a solo weapon, and then you're really laughing. I mean, the damage you're dealing and how fast the health bars drop just shows it all. It's literally broken. The fact that Malfeasance does more damage in one clip than the majority of supers in the game just says it all. Now, I don't usually cover broken builds that have the potential to be completely destroyed by nerfs, so with this build we'll be focusing more with any solar hand cannon, ideally Sunshot, to buff them as much as possible, while also maintaining a good and easy to use build loop that provides other benefits such as restoration and infinite melees, but I will cover both the Sunshot and Malfeasance with this build, and how it just works well with Lucky Pants, and how you should be using the build. There are some alternative exotics to use too, so I will go through those as well. So the exotic armor we're going to be using will be the Lucky Pants, but your primary alternative is going to be the Assassin's Cowl, so that powered melee final blows grant invisibility and restore a portion of health and shields. Great to use as a melee build, and also Caliban's Hand for pretty much another melee build except with the proximity knife, which is also a pretty fun one to use, but for that you'd usually use in easier content. So for this build we're going to be focusing around our hand cannons more, so we'll be using Lucky Pants. And what this does is when you ready a fully loaded hand cannon that deals kinetic damage or a damage that matches your subclass energy type, each hit with that hand cannon increases the damage of the next shot for a short time, and hand cannons ready faster and are more accurate when swapping to them. So this is the illegally modded holster, so basically you just want to swap to your hand cannon of choice when you're ready for some serious DPS, then shoot until you get the out of luck debuff, which is the cooldown before you can use that damage buff again. You can just pull out your ghost as a little trick instead of swapping to the weapon to get that buff triggered, so it is up to you how you want to use the build, but it is pretty easy to use anyway. Just swap to the hand cannon and shoot, literally that's all. If you're running a Malfeasance, you'd ideally want to run another primary weapon like the Cactus Mini Tool, something that's ideally solar energy, so you can take advantage of other buffs and benefits that we're getting with this build, because Malfeasance on its own is already pretty good for DPS in its bugged state anyway. Now Malfeasance will shoot unstoppable round slugs, so it is great to stop unstoppables, and it also has bonus damage against taken enemies as well, and pairing this with Lucky Pants just makes this quite lethal. But pairing it with Overload Hand Cannon right now in Season of the Witch bugs the weapon to deal with a 10 times damage stack twice as fast, so you can literally melt everything, and at the same time you can stop unstoppables and also overloads, which you shouldn't be able to do when an exotic has a specific champion mod on its own. So yeah, I think this is kinda broken, but it's extremely deadly when you do use it the right way. So the way you'll use this build in most activities is you'll first use your melee to kill an ad to spawn a fire sprite, get a damage buff to weapons, get radiant and spawn an orb. You'll then pick up the fire sprite and get kills for constant restoration, while spawning solar orbs to throw, giving ability energy and a chance to spawn heavy ammo. You then loop between the melee and the solar weapons to chain those buffs on a constant loop, and that's basically as simple as the build gets, maximizing those buffs out to its full potential while dealing some serious damage with Malfeasance if you swap to it when dealing with a boss. We're honestly getting that many buffs that half of them we can't even see on the screen, which is kind of funny. Now in the subclass, we're going to use the Hunter's solo subclass, the Gunslinger, but we're going to use the Blade Barrage, amazing super. And then you can use a Marksman's Dodge if you want to for the instant reload, but I generally prefer the Gambler's one so that we can get our melee back. Then for the melee, Knife Trick is what I recommend as this will scorch targets on hits, which pairs well with the build. We are running a Healing Grenade too. Then for aspects, we have Knock 'em Down so our solar super is enhanced, and while Radiant, Final Blows with our throwing knife fully refunds the melee. So we'll use Ember of Torches to become Radiant by hitting ads with that melee, and if it kills them, we'll get that melee back. So it's infinite melees, which is good, which also means the infinite 25% damage buff from the Radiant effect. And this works really well with this season's artifact perk, the Monochromatic, because you would essentially throw a knife to become Radiant for that damage buff, but also get another 10% buff with the artifact perk. So a 25% damage buff and another 10% buff to your solar weapons damage. And afterwards, you're getting the reverse, a 10% buff to your melee, so it just becomes easier to get those melee kills slightly. Then you just chain that on a loop. The second aspect we're using is On Your Mark. This doesn't actually matter, but we will get 3 extra fragment slots to use. So our first fragment is the Ember of Torches for Radiant, then we have Ember of Singeing so our class ability recharges faster when we scorch targets. Just great in case we need that dodge back if we had to use it. We also have Ember of Searing, so defeating scorched targets triggered by our melee will create a fire sprite. And if you're using weapons like a Callus mini tool with perks such as the Incandescent, you can scorch targets that way too to trigger the spawn of those fire sprites, which is pretty neat as well. And remember, those weapons are going to have that constant damage buff. But with our next fragment, Ember of Mercy, picking up the fire sprites will grant restoration and also grenade energy. It is a really short duration though, so a few melee kills for fire sprites should help bring that timer up. But with the last fragment, Ember of Imperium, solar weapon or ability final blows will extend the duration of both restoration and radiant. So just pick up a fire sprite, get a few melee kills in a row, and then you should be good to just use your buffed out weapons constantly for as long as there are adds around. Then it's infinite restoration on top of everything else, and since we're using 2 solar weapon surge mods in the legs, that damage boost is going to get buffed even more when we have armor charge stacks, which we'll be getting anyway from Orbs of Power, which we'll casually get from those melee kills using the heavy-handed mod in the arms. So you can see how easy this build is to use, and everything is just a constant loop chaining between each thing to trigger the next. But if you struggle with melee kills, the Solar Cypher mod is going to help you out anyway by getting rapid kills with your weapons too, which will also spawn the orbs. And speaking of orbs, using elemental orbs solar in the artifact, we're going to be able to make solar orbs on solar weapon kills, which can be used to throw at enemies to scorch them too. And with the elemental munitions perk, if that orb gets a few kills, we'll be spawning special and heavy ammo. So it's pretty much infinite heavy ammo as well. It's just crazy how many benefits we're actually getting with this build. The other perks we're running though are Elemental Fury for increased damage against champions, Communal Pickups so that we can get a little protection against allies who use our orbs, and Refreshing Pickups for some extra ability energy. Now the last few important mods here are just a hands-on, so we're running 2 of these to get our super faster on melee kills. Great mod for this build. And then in the class I'm using 2 utility kickstart mods for when we need that class ability back if we use it after losing a melee. But if you want to focus specifically on weapon surges, then you can remove these, but the amount of orbs we're going to spawn with this build anyway, it just doesn't really matter. You should have that armor charge stack pretty consistently. As for the stats, I tend to go with mobility, resilience and then strength. If you can get 100 strength, you won't actually need 100 mobility, and you can then use a marksman's dodge too. I found that having 100 mobility with a gambler's dodge is more effective if you lose that melee. So it is up to you, but here's my full artifact setup if you do want to copy it, and then again my full mod screen setup. But as always, I will have dim links below, so just make those adjustments to these surge mods to suit either the solar weapons or your kinetic for Malfeasance, whichever you're going to be using. So guys, I strongly recommend you set this build up and make the most out of it because it does a fantastic job. But if you don't like this one, full playlist below for more, and until then guys, take care and I'll see you in the next build.